Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Monroe County Economic Development, accepting applications for the Micro Advantage Loan Program designed to help small businesses with expenses such as equipment upgrades, marketing, and hiring. Details at monroecountybusiness.org. And the Highlands at Pittsford, an independent and assisted living community affiliated with the University of Rochester, offering cottage and apartment homes, daily life enrichment activities, and care assistance as needed. More at highlandsatpittsford.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, Governor Kathy Hochul's budget is out, and now the state legislature has to decide what passes, what is prioritized, what is not. And part of our series of conversations brings state lawmakers to you at length, talking about their priorities. We've been talking to Republicans and Democrats in the State Assembly and the New York State Senate. And continuing with that today, we welcome the Assembly member from District number 133 in the New York State Assembly. That's Assemblywoman Andrea Bailey, who is back with us. Welcome back. It's nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Evan. It's my honor to be here.
Is there any of your colleague who has to drive as much as you? I was just looking at the district map. It's a big map.
It's quite large, yes. It's a large area.
How many miles on the car in the last year?
About 40,000.
About 40,000. 40,000 miles. The district covers all of Livingston County, part of Ontario County, part of Wyoming County, part of Steuben County, part of Monroe County. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so it's a big wide range. Obviously, you've got different population bases, but plenty of rural areas. We're going to talk farms coming up here. The governor has some things to say about that. I know you've got some strong feelings about helping farmers. But before we get there, before the program began, you mentioned issue number one for you right now is what? What's on the table most?
The number one call coming into the office, it's a kind of a buzzword that you hear out right now, is affordability. But really tied to affordability is folks' utility bills. So that is a huge concern of mine. My colleagues and I, we just submitted a letter to the governor requesting that she call an energy state of emergency, because I really feel that we are at a critical state when it comes to our utility costs for the ratepayer. Some of that, I believe, much of that is self-induced with some of the legislation that has come forward. When you look at it, I believe that there is funding that we should be able to tap into to give homeowners and ratepayers an immediate relief in their monthly bills. And I think that we need to look at every avenue that we possibly can to be able to help that, because folks should not be thinking about, am I going to feed my family or am I going to keep them the heat on in my house?
Who do you blame most for the cost of energy right now?
I guess when you say blame, I look at it, I try to fly at that 30,000 foot range and come down through the clouds. I call that the noise, and then we can really look at what's happening. And that's kind of how I look at every issue. And I think sometimes, although maybe well-intended, we put laws or mandates into place, but we don't really think through what the end result is going to be. And I think we are absolutely living that right now with some of our CLCPA initiatives. They are quite aggressive, but there really was no plan set in place when that was initiated in 2019 to actually achieve the thresholds or the targets that were put out there realistically.
So specifically, what's a mandate that you say right now we should not be mandating X or Y or Z?
So I mean, honestly, if one of the biggest concerns, if you look at it, and it's been discussed ad nauseum, but is EV buses. That is probably one of the single most largest unfunded mandates that we've put onto our school districts. We continue to put Band-Aids on. We have the 2-year where you could get a 2-year waiver and then an additional 2-year waiver. But all we continue to do is kick the can down the road. We're not coming up with true solutions to help whether it be our schools, our municipalities, our residents. At the end of the day, that's impacting everybody's pocketbook.
So you talk about these waivers, the 2-year waivers. I haven't studied this issue in depth. I have heard of districts getting those waivers. Are you hearing anybody denied the waivers?
So it's quite interesting you bring that up, because I debated this portion during the budget bill last year. That's where the additional 2-year waiver came into play. During last year's budget hearings, we discussed EV buses at length, to the point where everyone understands it's a concern. It's not a we and a they. It's we understand as a collective group that there are concerns with this. Continuing just to put Band-Aids on it is not going to ultimately fix the issue. The issue is it's not practical in some of our areas. You mentioned my district. It's extremely rural. I've talked to many superintendents where it's not feasible. We don't have
There's no money in the budget.
There's no money in the budget. You just have a school. It's not in my district, so I'm not going to necessarily talk about it, but you just have a school recently here in Monroe County that voted down two bus purchases just within the last week. So it's something that taxpayers have a true concern about, and at the end of the day, that's who's going to bear the cost of it. So we really need to stop and think about, is it feasible? When you mandate that every school do this across the state, you're going to have a lot of pushback. There are probably schools that would do it if it was an option. That makes sense, where you have a smaller, more densely populated area where bus routes aren't 30, 40, 50 minutes long. And then you have, those schools would probably opt into this. That's going to help the green emissions, piece that we're pushing towards. But once you put mandates out there, we're just setting everyone up to fail, especially if there is no roadmap to get there and there is no funding to achieve it.
Small districts, rural districts, not big tax bases, budgets are tight to begin with. So, if the governor came back and said, look, I hear that, that's why we're giving these waivers out, what do you say?
So here was my question on the assembly floor. So the initial 2-year waiver, school can apply for it. I asked the question how many schools had applied for it. It only started, I believe, this year that they can start applying for those 2-year waivers. As you look to extend that, each school district then needs to meet with NYSERDA to come up with a plan on how they're going to reach what the expectation is. My question was, is NYSERDA ready to be able to meet with every school district across the state to be able to come up with that plan? Do they have enough staff? So although it sounds good on paper that we can continue to push these waivers and, extend it out an additional 2 years, what does that look like? And then now we're putting another burden back onto our administration that they have to now come up with yet another plan with another regulatory agency to move forward on something that really is not going to benefit everyone.
So your proposal is take the mandate off.
Absolutely.
Let districts that want to do this and think it's a good idea do it.
Absolutely.
And don't force the districts that feel strapped to do it.
Absolutely. I would definitely support that. If nothing else, we need to realign timeframes if it needs to come into a measure. But I would also put out there that once the state is 100% on EV vehicles, as they are pushing for other agencies to do it, then make that be the deadline, if that's what we want to do. But the state's fleets aren't there either. So we're asking others to do it, but yet we're not doing it ourselves.
What's been the response among your colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, and have you heard anything from the governor's office on this?
So, I think we heard, from the government or the governor's office when when they came out and we continue to see a pause on this, a pause on that.
Yeah.
We had January, it was supposed to be, 7-story buildings or less were all electric.
Right.
Well, there's a pause on that until the end of the year. A pause on that's not going to fix the issue that we don't have the power to be able to do that right now in our current infrastructure. Just like, the EV buses. Schools can't have a fleet of EV buses because the grid can't handle them being able to do that. So we have to really take a look, peel the onion back, and what are the answers to that? I think that it is a bipartisan concern, and I know there's bipartisan support to push back dates. Specifically, in my mind, I would like to just see it eliminated, the mandates eliminated, and put it more out. I don't know how much bipartisan support an elimination would get, in all honesty.
Why do you think the governor has agreed this year to a pause on a number of these green initiatives?
It's an election year.
Is it?
It is.
What is?
Believe it or not.
You
it
don't
is
think
no-
there's a substantive reason that's just, and it's coincidental that it's an election year?
I find it very interesting that it was at the beginning of the year and it was pushed out till December. So if we
After voting, yeah.
after voting, if we really wanted to make a difference for folks, there could have been language in the budget if we really were serious about this.
And the governor, we covered this about a month ago. The governor has upset some people who are, environmental activists, people often on the political left who've pushed for some of these changes. The governor's administration just greenlit 5 more years over on Seneca Lake of the Greenwich facility and Bitcoin mining that upset a lot of people who've been activists in the Finger Lakes. So, it is an interesting moment. I would like to talk to the governor about it. I don't think she would say it's because of an election. I think she would say we want to be realistic. She has said we want to be realistic about a cleaner energy transition while acknowledging, if we go 100% full bore right now, some people will be in real trouble. So you're just saying you see that as politically convenient for the moment.
I do, yes, personally.
Okay, and she's got a serious opponent. We haven't talked to Bruce Blakeman yet. We're going to try to do that on this program. But do you know her opponent?
I have met him, yes.
What do you make of him?
It was I was at an event and I, had the opportunity to speak to him. He has had great success in the county in which he's run, taxes.
It's a big county. He's a county executive, well known. Yeah.
It's a large county, taxes have come down. He has, he supports law enforcement and they're doing good things there under his leadership. What I have heard about him, from others is if he believes in something, he stands behind that. And I can appreciate that.
Well, we're going to see if we can have a conversation with him sooner than later on this program. Want to move on to farms in just a second here. But one other question I do have about energy is, are you comfortable with the actions of RG&E? Do you think that they've managed things well?
So I'm not going to talk about any one company because there's multiple companies in which I cover in my district. I would just, at this point in time, I would say everyone needs to take a look in the mirror, whether that be a provider or whether that be a legislator, looking at what is causing the crisis to where we are at this point in time is really what I'm going to say. Because I think everyone probably has an area of opportunity to look inward and figure out how do we make this right for the ratepayer, because that's ultimately what we need to do. And there is funding that I believe is available that has already been collected. Looking at a state, could we forego some of the taxes and different things that show up on your bill currently right now? When we're looking at some of the CLCPA mandates, a large portion of your bill is to satisfy those regulations, and we have to be realists about that.
You did mention earlier, for the people who are really suffering under heavy energy costs, some kind of relief. Where would that funding come from? Is that federal government? Is that state funding? Where is it coming from?
So I believe, there is funding right now that is unallocated to the tune of about $2.4 billion that NYSERDA has. That's kind of dormant. Not sure how we could do it, but I think we need to look at avenues to potentially get money out of there. And then the REGI fund, which is a Northeast state piece, there is funding in there. That's collected close to $3 billion over the last 15 years that could go to specifically help ratepayers on their bills.
Talking to Assemblywoman Andrea Bailey from New York State Assembly District number 133. And I want to talk about farms. I know this is obviously a very rural district for you, and it's a big issue for you. Reporting from my colleague Samuel King in Albany, and I'm going to cite Samuel's reporting on some of this and what the governor is proposing. And I want to hear what you think about some of what the governor said, and then I want to hear what you think should be prioritized. So first of all, from Samuel's reporting, Governor Kathy Hochul pushed back against critics who have called her plans to provide tariff relief for farmers a political stunt. The governor earmarked $30 million in her budget proposal for farmers affected by the tariffs that President Donald Trump has imposed. That is part of a larger farm aid package that also includes money to help modernize the state's dairy farms. And the governor said, if you want to be doing the political calculation, clearly, these are not areas that tend to vote Democrat where there's farms. Let's just put that out there. My only interest is knowing that they have been hit hard by the Trump tariffs, end quote. What do you make of that?
So I speak with farmers on a daily basis. I actually live with farmers. So absolutely, there's different pieces and there's different parts of the agriculture industry that have had a negative impact with the tariffs. Some have been positive. So I think that that's the biggest piece there. I think right now tariff is, one of those words that we, for whatever reason, we're going to sit and argue about. At the end of the day, the thought process behind tariffs and the reason for that, the long-term return on investment, it's really about bringing things back into our country and utilizing our resources here. So overall, conceptually, I understand that. I believe that. I think the other piece that we have to look at when we're looking at farmers, when there's aid given on a federal level, or if it's on a state level, you often hear critics that say the farmers are always getting the aid. I think what folks don't realize is that the prices that the farmers are receiving, whether it be for milk, whether it be for their cash crops, that's all regulated. They don't get to dictate what they are going to, sell their product at that value. And as prices go up, those prices are not going up at the same rate that they're going up that you might see on the shelf in a grocery store. So someone else is making that, getting that revenue bump. It's not the farmers. And I think that farmers oftentimes get criticized or are an easy target because aid goes out to farmers. But I think you really need to take a step back and look at what does that mean at the end of the day? Because let's face it, you're not farming to get rich. My son wants nothing more than to continue to farm the crop farm that we have. I've had the conversation with him. It's got to be a hobby. You're not going to be able to make a living doing that, and a lot of that comes down to the pricing and the commodities.
Does he listen to you?
I hope so.
What does he grow?
So we have corn and soybeans, and then we'll trade it up with wheat also, winter wheat. So
yeah, soybeans is one that some critics of the tariffs have pointed to because China is a big buyer of American soybeans. And that market went away when China responded to the American tariffs and said, all right, we'll buy from Brazil. American soybean farmers kind of united and said, we're going to end up throwing soybeans on the ground. And the Trump administration, recently the USDA said they're going to offer $12 billion for soybean farmers across the country to make them whole. Because for those who have grown soybeans that they couldn't sell all of a sudden, the Trump administration said, well, here's some money to back you up on that. Do you think that makes sense to you? I
do. From the standpoint that in the long-term impact, I think it will benefit our farmers. And why I say that is right now, when we take a look at what's happening in New York State with agriculture land, we have many individuals, and I'm not one to tell someone what to do with their own property. But if you rent out your farmland, and you might be able to get 100, 200 on the top end to rent out your farmland for someone to farm it versus $800 to $1,000 per acre to put up a solar field, what are you doing? You're probably looking, if you're looking from a long-term standpoint, in what are you going to do, what's best for your family? And we're seeing our agriculture land being taken up by solar projects left and right. We have prime farmland that we're losing for that. What's that going to ultimately end up doing? We're going to have, no farm, no food is one of the comments that one of my colleagues says all the time, and it is very true. We have different programs in New York State to try and get, fresh, homegrown farm products into our schools, working with different agencies to make sure that, working with the food pantries and, food links, so on and so forth. And we need to be doing more of that. But unfortunately, some of the regulation to get there, it's too much red tape to get through. So then you have farmers that choose not to take part in those programs. So the regulations that we have in this state, I think, are part of our biggest obstacle to move forward, kind of, going back to the affordability piece. We have over 300,000 regulations on the book. I made a comment at a breakfast a couple weeks ago that I said, one of my colleagues in the minority has a bill that for every regulation you want to put in place, we need to remove 2. And we need to continue to think that way because regulations in New York State are hurting our farmers as well. And I don't think we talk enough about that.
So if there are all these regulations, I mean, I take the point, there's a lot of regulations, but I mean, is there a dirty dozen that you'd love to see get rid of right away? Are there 5 or 6 that stand out? Is there, how would you describe it?
So I guess it depends on what subject matter you're talking about specifically. A great example is, I brought up solar fields. We as a state have gone in, ORIS, the Office of Renewable Energy, can go in and fast track large solar projects now. I have a constituent who's trying to put residential solar on their property so that they can be self-sufficient and help themselves, but also, help the grid. And they're coming up against roadblock over roadblock over roadblock because of the red tape in order for them to be able to do it. But yet, within a very short period of time, conceptually, we have large-scale solar being approved.
Okay, so there's an example. Do you want to see less large-scale solar in general?
It's a good question. I believe that we need to be realistic when we're looking at large-scale solar. Mm-hmm. We are pushing large-scale solar in the name of clean, green energy, saving the environment, moving forward. But what are we doing in order to get those panels in the ground? That's what concerns me. We have a large project going in on prime farmland. We have a project that is going to horizontally drill underneath the Genesee River to put electrical lines to get it over to the transfer station that it needs to get to. We have a project that is clear cutting 114 acres of forest. So we have to talk about what is ultimately really happening when these large scale projects are coming into an area. The problem is they're not being put down where many of the folks who are advocating for this reside. It's happening in my district. It's happening in the 133rd district to a large degree, and it's happening in rural upstate New York.
So it's a location question?
I would say I asked this on the floor. I watched, a talk show. They had just moved into a new building down in New York City. They were up on a fake green grass rooftop area. That would have been a great place to put some solar panels. I did hear during the budget hearings that they're looking to put solar panels, I think it was on JFK parking garage. That's a good use of where we could utilize solar panels. Putting it on prime farmland, over 3,000 acres of farmland, to me, that is not a good use of that agriculture space.
So again, what do your colleagues in Albany say when you bring this up?
Crickets, kind of like right now.
You don't feel a lot of momentum on this?
There is, well, it depends on which side of the aisle you're talking about. I think part of the concern is the pushback. In the minority conference, there is a large, vocal spot for it, mm-hmm. and what is happening to our agricultural land. But unfortunately, some of my colleagues in the majority, I don't feel that. There was a bill last year that went through on how farmland is going, or how solar projects, wind projects, how that property, it's going to be assessed for tax purposes. And at the end of the day, it is hurting municipalities. And that bill that we debated is a result of a lawsuit that's happening right now. And the municipality, based on the equation, is losing upwards of $3 million in tax revenue. So those are the real things that are happening on the ground. You have these projects go in, they're fast-tracked moving forward, and then at the end of the day, from an assessment process, now we're saying we have to stay within this formula. Well, the formula is giving every credit possible and then using decommissioning as an expense. So when you're looking at the value of that land, it's hurting our local municipalities.
All right, on farming, a couple of the things from the governor. It is true that the $30 million that's been proposed to help farmers has not really been specifically described. How that's going to be used. Agricultural Commissioner Richard Ball said he doesn't have a lot of specifics about that money yet. He says the idea of larger operations may have suffered more than others, said Ball, who owns a farm in Schoharie County. But he says, I think the point is we're dealing with kind of a real-time, chaotic federal government that's already proven to be uncertain in this regard. So $30 million for farmers, would you vote for it? Is that something you'd want to see passed?
So absolutely. The problem with that is it's going to be in the budget. And, I get asked often, when the budget bill comes up, I can tell you after, going through my first budget last year, digging into it, there absolutely are good things that are in the budget, and I wholeheartedly support. But unfortunately, it's lumped in with some other measures that may not be good for the district in which I represent. And, so you have to weigh the good with the bad, because that's what happens with the budget. And then you throw legislation in there on top of it, and it makes for interesting reading.
Interesting reading, and an up-down vote. So, a hard sell for the minority conference, I think. Governor Hochul, finally from Samuel King, my colleague Samuel King in Albany. Governor Hochul also wants to extend tax credits for another 5 years to offset some costs for farmers to make investments on their farms. It's something that dairy farmers say have been vital to help take advantage of the industry's growth in recent years across New York State. What do you make of that one?
I would agree with that. We have a farm in the district that actually they have a digester. They take scrap food from, they work with different agencies. They've worked with Wegmans. They work with FoodLink. And foods that can't be done, they put that into their digester, with the manure that's produced on site. And they are able to power their farm and then also move power out onto the grid. So that is where some of that funding has been utilized, and it's being utilized in a positive, resourceful way. And those are the true solutions that I think we need to work together and figure out how do we get more of that going on.
We got to get our only break of the hour in, and we'll come right back with Assembly Member Andrea Bailey from District Number 133 in the New York State Assembly, talking about not only the governor's proposed budget, but what she would like to see prioritized in Albany this year. We'll come right back.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Prospect Fund, announcing the film The Voice of Hind Rajab, based on the true story of a 6-year-old Palestinian girl and efforts to rescue her in war-torn Gaza. Screening at the Little Theater February 6th through 12th. Details and tickets at thelittle.org. And Bob Johnson Auto Group, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. Proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, focused on the news, issues, and trends that shape the lives of listeners in the Rochester and Finger Lakes regions. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Let me grab a few listener questions, and Jack in Greece is first up. Hey, Jack, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Evan. Representative, I appreciate you coming online talking with us. You don't represent my district. I live in the town of Greece, but I appreciate you coming online. I looked at your site quickly, and I know you had commented that you thought the budget was too big for New York State. But what I would be interested in hear from you is how much would you cut it? If you had the ability to cut the state budget, what percentage would you take out? And then what areas would you target? What are the primary areas you think should be cut? And I guess, I appreciate, from a taxpayer standpoint, it's very difficult for me to understand what's in the budget. I know what the numbers are that I have to pay, and they're very high. So what would you do, and what would be the trade-offs that you think should be made if you make cuts to certain areas? What would be the negative of that? What would be the impact of that? You mentioned there were good things in the budget, and that's what I ask my representative to do, is represent the whole state, not just our. I hope you look at the whole broad perspective and say what's good for the whole state, because we stick out as a very, very expensive place to live.
All right, well, Jack, I appreciate that. Assemblymember Bailey?
Yeah, that's actually a loaded question right there. I think the one piece that I would kind of hone in on, and not to skirt an answer, but in all transparency, you got to peel back the onion. And when you're looking at the budget, it's so convoluted when you're looking at all the different line items where money is allocated. I think what we really need to do is look at how that funding is being utilized. And in any given budget proposal, the numbers are there. You can look and, yep, that sounds good. That looks good. But let's reflect back to previous budgets where money has been allocated and, being laser focused in on how do we manage that? And, the comptroller, Tom DiNapoli's office, does various reports and audits when it go, into different departments, looking at different funding. Medicaid is one thing that's, being talked about hotly this year.
Do we spend too much on Medicaid?
So when you look at the report from Comptroller DiNapoli, there are areas, the one report is indicating $1.2 billion that we have spent on individuals who no longer reside in the state. And then additional funding to the tune of a few $100 million that was allocated and used with Medicaid funding that individuals should have been transitioned over to Medicare. So if you look at just those two examples right there, you're at $1.5 billion, close to $2 billion of funding in a program that should not have been administered to the individuals that it was administered.
What's the full Medicaid budget for the state?
It's 30
some billion?
Billion, yes.
Okay, so it's $30+ billion. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're finding maybe two there.
Two there, absolutely. But when the talk is out there about, federal cuts coming in, we need to laser focus on how the funding that is in any one given budget being utilized in the state currently. If we've allocated funding, there was another report that came out, and it has to do with replacing water lines for lead. And the majority of that funding had not been utilized yet. So why is the funding not being utilized? Because I think when you're looking at a budget, that's probably a line item that needs to be in there, because that's a concern. If we have infrastructure underground, going into our neighborhoods that have contamination, we need to exchange that out. It goes back to mandates. It goes back to regulations. It goes back to the hoops that folks need to jump through in order to secure that funding. And that's really where I would like to take a look at. I don't have a necessary number that, $200 billion is the right number.
The current budget proposal is $260.
$260.
So you don't look at that and say, well, it should be $200, it should be $220, not necessarily?
I think you have to deep dive into where that money is actually being allocated and how is it being utilized.
And one other thing on Medicaid, certainly I take the point that, if people have moved out of state, why are we still funding their Medicaid? Or if people should have been transitioned to Medicare, what's going on there? In general, do you think the state is too broad in what it offers Medicaid recipients?
I think where my biggest concern comes into play is how we define what residency is. It's very lenient. I don't know the answer, but what is it that we're looking at? How do we establish residency? And that's probably the first place that I would look to see if there's an opportunity to bring that in there.
Joel writes in to ask, and by the way, thank you, Jack. Joel writes in to ask, do you support the state investing in nuclear energy?
I do. I've said it for years. Nuclear is clean energy, the word nuclear is scary, but where technology has gotten us to this point, I think it is a good investment for the state to continue to look in there. Unfortunately, it's the time frame in order to get new projects up and running. You're talking years out. And, talking with the Department of Energy, at the federal level, what's the fastest we could move something through? You're looking close to 7.5, upwards of 10 years to get something moving. So is that the short-term fix? Absolutely is not. But I think that where technology has brought us, I do support nuclear energy.
Kristen says, can you talk about China buying up large amounts of U.S. farmland, please? I saw a New York Times story on that. Is that happening here?
In New York State specifically?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
You're not aware in your own district of that happening?
I am not.
Okay.
I can tell you that foreign countries, if you want to look at it from that place, have bought up farmland to put solar projects. Investment companies from out of the country have bought land to put solar on.
Okay. And Greg wrote in to ask if you're concerned about how ICE is behaving in New York State, or if you're concerned about what you saw in Minneapolis with ICE.
So, I'll be completely honest with you. Folks have said, the videos, this and that. I didn't watch many of the videos or even look at them because
Renee Good or Alex Preddy?
You have to. I saw them, but I didn't continuously watch them. If people are saying, did you see the latest video that came out? I can honestly say, no, I didn't, because at the end of the day, when I look at New York State and what's happening here, ICE was established coming out of 9/11.
Yeah.
ICE has been around, give or take, 25 years.
Yeah.
And they have been partnering in our localities right through, for the last 25 years without large concern. Is it concerning to see what's happening in Minnesota? Absolutely it is. It's concerning for me anytime we get so polarized as a nation, as a community, to where you have us versus them, and you have individuals who are, degrading their neighbor, and I just think at the end of the day, I'm not in Minneapolis. I can't tell you what's actually happening. I can tell you what's happening here, what I see here firsthand. And I want to make sure that the individuals of New York State are protected.
Okay. And I also take the point, by the way, that I don't think anybody should be watching videos on a loop of people getting killed. And that's what social media sometimes becomes.
Absolutely.
But so granting you that, you have seen some of the videos. Does it look to you like the shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy were justified?
I'll be completely honest with you, Evan. I don't know. I was not there. I am not stating that I think one is right and one is wrong. It's absolutely devastating. Anytime that you have a death on any means, it is, to me personally, that's devastating. And I think that we need an investigation into how that was handled, what is being done, how do we do things differently? And I think we've seen that even in New York State with various things that have happened in our own state. Something happens, and then we have to have the investigation go on. That due process piece of things, I think, should be, entitled to everyone. And I'm a firm believer on that. So I have not made a statement, and nor will I.
Yeah, and I also take the point, too, for people who are feeling really agitated in the moment or thinking that this is a brand new thing. ICE has been around since post 9/11. And I think the question that is relevant for state lawmakers is what we are seeing a departure of the norm in the last 25 years? In other words, you have a pretty conservative judge who clerked for Scalia in Minneapolis saying he's got 96 instances of ICE agents taking phones away, knocking phones from people's hands when they were lawfully filming police, or not police, ICE officers, ICE agents, knocking people down, escalating. To that judge, this looks like an escalation, a departure of what we've seen from ICE for 25 years. And so the question I think becomes is, does it look like an escalation to you, and are you comfortable with ICE operating in this state or in your district?
They're operating in our district right now.
Of course. Yes.
They already are.
Yes.
So from that standpoint, I would say yes, because we have not, you mentioned social media. You know, social media is a big piece to all of this. I honestly feel it's, everybody needs an instant answer. They need, cell phones in general. If you don't get back in touch with somebody, they're like, hey, where are you? Where are you? It's like, well, I'm in, doing something. But so I think it's just that instant gratification. We want the answer now. I'm going to be there. I need to do this. I need to do that. At the end of the day, I think we need to take a step back and we need to look at what we're doing.
Okay. And last point is, you're someone who knows a little bit about gun permitting, right? I mean, I don't know if people know your career before the assembly, but you know very well what it takes to get a permit, what the laws are. What surprised me after the shooting of Alex Preddy was how many people in the administration indicated that the fact that he had a gun on his person at all was either a justification of the shooting of him, or an indication that he was de facto dangerous or a problem, or it was a bad decision, when he has a concealed carry permit, a legal permit, and he's got the gun on his person. He doesn't brandish it. He doesn't wave it. And, this is an example. I think we've got a piece of sound from Gregory Bavino. Megan, is that right? The head of Customs and Border Patrol talking about it. And I want to listen to what Bavino said about that.
What I'm saying is we respect that Second Amendment right, but those rights don't count when you riot and assault, delay, obstruct, and impede law enforcement officers, and most especially when you mean to do that beforehand.
Yeah. So in a sense, what he says is not wrong. You can't riot and attack police with a gun. Everybody agrees with that. It's a question of whether you think that's what Alex Preddy was doing. And Kristi Noem said you just can't bring a gun to a protest. Kash Patel said you can't bring a gun to a protest. President Trump said you can't have a gun in that situation. But the law says you can. Do you think the administration's right or wrong on that one?
So in I guess that's going to be an opinion for each individual at that point in time. So the federal law as it's written right now does not say you can't do that. New York state law, the way it's written right now, says you cannot do that.
In this state?
If that happened in New York state law, it would be accurate. You can't do that. That's the way in which the law is written.
They know the laws in Minneapolis. They know the laws in Minnesota are not the laws in New York.
So, but at the end of the day, I don't know what the laws are in Minnesota or Minneapolis, or I don't even know what law they're referring to. So I can't speak to that, to be completely honest with you. New York state law, as it pertains to, Second Amendment and various bills on that, I'd be more than happy to discuss that. I don't know what law they're referring to.
I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that given your experience and given the work that you do in the Republican Party, you'd like to see laws offer more rights to gun owners in the state. Is that generally true?
I think what we see each and every day. So, yes, and I say that with the caveat of this. We take knee-jerk reactions. We have a situation, say it's gun violence. We're going to, impose new legislation because of gun violence. We saw, when the Supreme Court came out with the ruling that you can't ask for a reason why you want a concealed carry permit, and that prompted back in 22,
right.
The CCIA. What we saw was additional red tape for our law-abiding citizens who already have a pistol permit. Yeah. That, in my mind, the individual who is, in a gang or driving down the road who has a filed off serial number on their weapon or getting it through the black market, they're not going to the county clerk to register the pistol permit or, their pistol. They are not going and taking any gun safety course. So what, at the end of the day, did we do to help stop gun violence by doing those measures. And I think that that's where it is we take knee-jerk reaction. But at the end of the day, if we want to talk about gun violence and we want to talk about how do we get the guns off the street, it's not necessarily piling on to Penal Law 400 additional steps that someone has to go through in order to get a law-abiding citizen to get a pistol permit.
I was just surprised to see Republicans say what they said about Preddy and gun ownership in general, or following the law in the state that you're in. It was surprising to me, and it made me wonder if we're ever going to see meaningful change in gun laws here. If you want to see more gun rights in this state, if you've got Republicans looking at Minnesota going, you can't have a gun at a protest. It's like, well, I guess we never really believed this, but maybe I'm overreading that.
There's many times that I scratch my head when I hear individuals say certain things, but I don't know why they said what they said, and I can't.
I got you.
It is what it is.
All right. Robert in Fairport wants to jump in. Hey, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for taking the call. The solar panels, I just fail to see the common sense in putting a solar panel farm up in one of the cloudiest places in the entire country. But, driving to Bristol Mountain, you see a new one between Victor and Bloomfield, and it's you got a farm field that's taken over with these ridiculous things. Is there any room in the state to create legislation that requires companies putting these in to create a sinking fund so that once these things are technologically obsolete, which is just a few years down the road, that they can be removed?
So right now that's left to the local municipalities as far as decommissioning and what those agreements are. I'm glad you bring this up because I actually have a bill that I introduced or that I carry, and it would be the renewable energy, the Responsible Renewable Energy Recycling Act, which would require the manufacturers to be responsible for the recycling of wind turbines, battery backup, or solar panels, because we know they all have an end-of-life cycle. And some of the early solar projects that we saw, they're coming off their life cycle right now, So what are we doing with those solar panels? There is nothing right now in statute that says how they need to be recycled. That is extremely concerning. So here's another measure where we're pushing forward on something, but we haven't thought about what are we going to do? Let's kick the can down the road. We got 25 years, we got 30 years, whatever the lifespan is of that is going to be. But some of these panels have harmful materials that are in them. The other thing that concerns me, right now, we truck New York City's garbage up into our landfills here in our backyards. So,
And a number of landfills.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, where are these solar panels going to end up? They're going to end up in our backyard, in our landfills, if we don't take measures to move this, to move this forward. I asked the commissioner during the budget hearings this year from the DEC. I mentioned my bill, and I said I would like to speak with DEC about that because they are charged right now with what that looks like, and it's still under review. But I really think that we need to put some meaningful measures in place if we really want to take care of our environment. We have to do it for the full, from the beginning to the end.
Before we let you go here, a question on taxes for you. So within the Democratic Party, which is not your party, there's sort of a brewing little battle over a super wealth tax. And the governor says she doesn't want it. She doesn't think we need it. A number of Democrats in Albany in the state Senate and the state Assembly say we should pass this tax. It is the right thing to do now. Do you want to offer any advice for your colleagues on that one?
I am not a fan of it, and I've had that conversation with groups who have come into my office, and look at that as a revenue stream. I honestly believe that increasing taxes, no matter where it is or who it's on, should be a last-ditch effort. And I think that there's probably areas that we could look at first and foremost. My concern with that is we look at, out-migration between that 24 and 44-year-old age. That's our workforce right now. So, if we look to tax the ultra-rich or, whatever, I've heard different numbers. I've heard, different thresholds from that standpoint. What does that do at the end of the day? And do we see that population leave New York?
Last minute, you came on this program when you were running. Now you're in Albany, and you knew what you were signing up for in the minority conference. What has surprised you the most about the work?
I don't know if it's anything that necessarily has surprised me. I think what was eye-opening was the beginning of session. We're in session from January to June. The beginning of session is pretty mundane. You might go into session, you're there for an hour, and then you're out. And then, we passed over 900 bills last year in the Assembly, and probably 600 and 600 to 700 of them were in the last 7 to 10 days. So
not the most efficient way to do it.
The absolute inefficiency that we see. That's probably the most frustrating on my.
Because you're probably trying to review bills, and all of a sudden you got 10 days to review 300 bills, and it's like.
Well, sometimes it comes onto your calendar that day because at the end of session.
The day of the vote?
The day of the vote,
Yeah.
Yep. It goes into rules, and then it comes out on the floor.
Well, I appreciate you coming in. I know our audience does as well. And I want to thank you for making the time, and I hope we can continue to talk with routine here. Assemblymember Bailey, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evan.
From District number 133 in the New York State Assembly, that is Andrea Bailey. We've got more connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.